Could this really be the moment that changes the British monarchy forever? Imagine waking up one morning to find that the titles and honors your family has carried for generations, symbols of prestige, legacy, and duty, have been stripped away, not as a result of scandal nor a public vote, but by the very hands that once vowed to protect them. King Charles III, the new sovereign, has reportedly taken the unprecedented step of removing all royal titles from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. But that's only the beginning. What triggered such a seismic decision? And how did Prince William, the future king, play a role in this unfolding drama? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It's easy to assume that royal decisions are slow, ceremonial, and above personal squabbles. But behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, decisions are made with pressure, persuasion, and sometimes pure emotional rawness. Charles, Harry, Meghan, and William, these are not just public figures. They are family, and family dynamics are messy. We've seen tension before. We've seen rifts grow. But what appears to have happened now may be unprecedented in modern royal history. The combination of personal loyalty, public scrutiny, and international media pressure has created a perfect storm that no one saw coming. To understand why this moment matters, we need to put ourselves in Charles's shoes. Imagine being a father, a king, and a man constantly in the public eye. Every move you make is scrutinized. Every word you say is amplified. And yet, you are expected to navigate your children's decisions, your sibling relationships, and the expectations of a nation that watches with bated breath. Prince William, as the heir apparent, holds influence too. His opinions, his expectations, his own vision for the monarchy carry weight that cannot be ignored. And when he reportedly made certain statements regarding the return of Harry and Meghan as working royals, Charles was faced with an impossible choice. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan are no strangers to controversy, media attention, or public judgment. Their exit from full-time royal duties in 2020, the so-called Megxit, sent shockwaves around the world. Interviews, tell-all specials, and media appearances have kept them in the public eye, and not always under flattering scrutiny. Yet, the idea that they might return as working royals has been floated repeatedly, sometimes in the press, sometimes in whispers within palace corridors. The suggestion of their return, however, appears to have met with unexpected resistance from William, creating tension that ultimately escalated into a historic royal confrontation. Public reaction to this development has been as swift as it is polarized. Social media platforms exploded within hours of the news leaking. Headlines range from outrage to sympathy, from criticism of Harry and Meghan to speculation about Charles's decision-making. Comment sections lit up with debates about fairness, duty, and loyalty. Yet, beneath the clamor, there lies a far more complex narrative, one that involves strategy, timing, and perhaps even a desire to protect the monarchy from further public backlash. These are decisions that are rarely made lightly, and even rarer without leaving traces of human emotion behind. But let's pause for a moment and consider the human side of this story. Prince Harry is not just a royal. He's a son, a brother, a husband, a father. Meghan is not just a duchess in title. She is a mother, a partner, and a public figure whose every move is judged against an impossible standard. Their response to the stripping of titles is not merely a PR problem. It's deeply personal. How does one navigate the public humiliation of losing titles they were born into or earned through marriage? How do they process anger, betrayal, and the sense of being misunderstood, all while the cameras are watching and the world is commenting? In every royal family, there are protocols, traditions, and rules that govern behavior. Titles are not just decorative. They represent responsibility, expectation, and privilege. Stripping someone of a title is symbolic and practical. It changes how they are perceived, how they are treated, and how they are able to act in official capacities. And yet, it's not only about titles. This action sends a message, both inside and outside the palace walls. It signals limits, boundaries, and, perhaps, the consequences of challenging the established order. The symbolism is as powerful as the reality. As we peel back the layers, it becomes clear that this is not just a story about Harry and Meghan. It's about succession, about loyalty, about family dynamics, about public perception, and about the pressures of modern monarchy in an age of transparency, social media, and relentless scrutiny. It's about a father trying to reconcile duty with love. It's about a brother navigating power and personal conviction. It's about two individuals caught between family expectations and personal agency. The stakes are enormous, and the consequences are far-reaching, not just for the individuals involved, but for the institution of the monarchy itself. And then there's the media narrative, the leaks, the interviews, the speculation. Every statement is dissected, every rumor amplified. For decades, the world has watched the Windsors through a lens of fascination and judgment. But this moment, the stripping of titles, is different. It's raw, immediate, and emotionally charged in a way that few royal events are. Social media users, journalists, and royal commentators alike are weighing in, each adding a layer to the narrative, each influencing public perception in real time. The palace, while accustomed to scrutiny, may be facing an intensity it has not experienced before. Yet, even with all the facts we know, the story is far from complete. There are whispers of private meetings, of strategy sessions behind closed doors, of letters and conversations that have never been made public. What was said? Who influenced whom? What pressures were applied? These are the questions that fuel curiosity, that compel the public to keep watching, reading, and discussing. And here's the twist. The answers may not fully satisfy anyone, because, in the royal world, appearances matter as much as reality, and every truth is layered with interpretation. Now, here's where it gets even more intriguing. Reports suggest that Prince William, the future king, may have issued what could be described as an ultimatum. While details are murky, the implication is that the possibility of Harry and Meghan returning as working royals was contingent upon conditions that some insiders consider unreasonable, or at least emotionally charged. This is not merely a disagreement about protocol. This is a confrontation with consequences that reverberate through the family, the monarchy, and the public. It raises questions about power, influence, and loyalty in ways that are deeply personal, yet public at the same time. So why should you care? Because this isn't just royal gossip. It's a story about influence, loyalty, family, and the human cost of power. It's a story that shows what happens when duty collides with personal belief, when tradition meets modern scrutiny, and when family loyalty is tested under the harshest of spotlights. This is history in the making, unfolding in real time, and it affects not only those within the palace walls, but also the millions around the world who watch, analyze, and react. And here's the kicker, the story is far from over. Even as titles are stripped, statements are released, and public opinions swirl, the real consequences are still emerging. What comes next could redefine the monarchy forever. Will Harry and Meghan accept the decision silently, or will they fight back in ways we can't yet predict? Will Charles maintain unity within the family, or will rifts deepen beyond repair? And where does Prince William's influence fit into this evolving saga? Could one phone call really change the course of a monarchy? Imagine the scene. Buckingham Palace, a historic residence echoing with centuries of protocol, quiet hallways suddenly charged with tension. It wasn't just another meeting. It wasn't another ceremonial discussion about charity events, royal duties, or diplomatic visits. This was personal. This was a fracture, the first visible crack in what many considered a carefully maintained facade of unity. And at the center of it all were four individuals whose relationships are as complicated as they are public: King Charles, Prince William, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle. The breaking point didn't arrive overnight. It was decades in the making. From the moment Harry was born, there was a unique dynamic between him and William, an unspoken rivalry shadowed by love, expectation, and the immense pressure of royal life. While William, the heir apparent, was groomed under intense scrutiny, Harry was often seen as the freer, more rebellious child, protected by his father but simultaneously positioned in the shadow of a future king. That shadow never fully lifted, and as they grew, the subtle tensions, competition, and differences in perspective accumulated. Enter Meghan. From the moment she married Harry, she was perceived as a disruptor by many within the palace walls. Not because of anything she did wrong, at least in public, but because her very presence challenged long-standing traditions. Her American background, her media savvy, and her outspoken personality were not things the monarchy had cultivated. Some insiders even describe her as a whirlwind that both energized and unsettled the royal household. And Harry, caught between duty and love, made decisions that intensified existing tensions. He chose to step back. He chose to relocate. He chose independence. Actions that many interpreted as rebellion, but that, in truth, reflected a complex desire for personal freedom in the face of institutional rigidity. The breaking point began in earnest when speculation arose that Harry and Meghan might return to royal duties as working royals. It started as whispers, a subtle shift in language during media appearances, vague hints in interviews, and carefully worded statements that suggested the couple was willing to consider reintegration. These whispers reached the ears of Prince William, who, as the future king, interpreted them through a lens of responsibility, family honor, and the delicate balance of public perception. The reports claimed that William was not just hesitant. He was opposed, issuing a strong, possibly verbal, ultimatum regarding their return. For Charles, this was the heart of the dilemma. A father, navigating the expectations of a king, suddenly confronted with a family dispute that had the potential to dominate headlines and disrupt centuries of carefully curated tradition. His advisors reportedly presented him with conflicting recommendations. Some urged leniency, appealing to familial compassion. Others stressed the long-term damage to the monarchy if perceived weakness was shown. Charles, known for his ability to weigh both sides, now had to make a decision that combined his duties as a sovereign with the deeply personal realities of fatherhood. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan were far from passive observers. In private, they were reportedly discussing strategies, weighing their options, and anticipating reactions. Their lawyers, PR teams, and close friends advised caution. But caution was complicated by emotions, by the years of tension, by the perception that the monarchy had never fully embraced them. They had already faced public criticism, invasive media scrutiny, and repeated judgment from a world that rarely paused to consider the human cost of royalty. Now, with the prospect of returning as working royals on the table, the stakes had reached unprecedented heights. What really pushed the situation past the tipping point, according to sources close to the palace, was a combination of timing, wording, and perception. A single misinterpreted comment, a leaked email, or a strategically released statement could ignite conflict that might otherwise have been manageable behind closed doors. Charles, in one account, reportedly wrestled with the notion that any move in favor of Harry and Meghan's return could be seen as undermining William, destabilizing the line of succession, and creating public confusion. Conversely, failing to consider the couple's wishes risked alienating them completely and sparking international criticism. The tension manifested in meetings that insiders describe as emotionally charged and, at times, confrontational. Advisors claim that conversations escalated quickly, moving from polite discussion to urgent negotiation. The air was reportedly thick with unspoken grievances, family history, and the burden of centuries-old tradition. Imagine walking into a room where every glance carries judgment, every sentence carries weight, and every decision might be dissected by millions of eyes worldwide. That is the world the royal family inhabits, and it is precisely the environment in which the breaking point was reached. Observers suggest that the breaking point was not a single moment, but a culmination. There were warnings, arguments, and attempts at compromise, but the emotional undercurrents were impossible to ignore. William's statement, or what is reported as a statement, acted as the final catalyst, transforming simmering tension into decisive action. Charles, caught between love for his sons and duty to the crown, made a move that would reverberate throughout the monarchy. He stripped Harry and Meghan of all their royal titles. This action, though procedural in language, was profoundly personal. Titles are not merely words. They signify authority, duty, and belonging. Stripping someone of a title is akin to cutting a thread from a centuries-old tapestry. The fabric may hold, but the absence is undeniable. And for Harry and Meghan, this was not just a public rebuke. It was a familial one, a symbolic statement that crossed the boundary between institutional protocol and personal relationship. Public reaction was immediate and intense. Social media users debated morality, fairness, and tradition. Commentators dissected the palace's messaging, analyzing tone, timing, and implication. International media outlets speculated endlessly. Was this the result of long-standing personal disputes, a strategic move to appease William, or a defensive act by Charles to protect the monarchy from further scrutiny? Every theory added fuel to the fire, making the situation not just a family matter, but a global spectacle. But what made this breaking point truly pivotal was the human element. Beyond titles, legalities, and media coverage, this was a story about relationships tested under extreme pressure. It was about siblings navigating rivalry, a father managing loyalty and duty, and two individuals striving to assert agency within a rigid institution. The emotional complexity of the situation is what keeps people watching. It's relatable on a fundamental level: family, conflict, and the struggle between personal values and societal expectation. As the palace adjusted to the decision, insiders say that the atmosphere became tense and strategic. Allies of the couple were weighing statements. Royal advisors were coordinating messaging. Legal teams were preparing for possible backlash. The breaking point had passed, but the repercussions were only beginning. The dominoes were set, and the next moves would determine whether the monarchy could weather the storm or whether this was the start of a permanent fracture. And here's where the suspense truly thickens. Reports now suggest that Harry and Meghan were not prepared to accept this quietly. Rumors of upcoming statements, interviews, and public appearances hint at a calculated response that could turn the royal narrative upside down. Charles's decision may have been decisive, but it was far from final in the court of public opinion. William's influence had triggered the chain reaction, but how it would play out remained uncertain. The breaking point, then, is both an ending and a beginning. It marks the collapse of prior negotiations, the crystallization of tension, and the moment where personal and public worlds collide. The real story, however, is what comes next: the fallout, the responses, and the ultimate consequences for the monarchy, for Harry and Meghan, and for the family dynamic that has captivated the world for decades. Imagine being the future king of one of the oldest monarchies in the world, and suddenly, the balance of your family and your future reign is at stake. That was the position Prince William reportedly found himself in when whispers of Harry and Meghan's possible return as working royals reached him. For William, this was not a trivial matter of protocol or titles. It was about preserving the integrity of the monarchy, protecting public perception, and, perhaps most importantly, asserting his vision for the future. But in taking a stand, he set in motion a chain of events that would escalate tensions to unprecedented levels. The story begins with subtle signals. In the weeks leading up to the alleged ultimatum, insiders suggest that William grew increasingly concerned about the media narrative surrounding Harry and Meghan. Every appearance, interview, or social media post seemed to stoke speculation about a potential comeback. Royal watchers noted his visible discomfort during public engagements, the careful wording of statements from Clarence House, and the intensity of private meetings with advisors. All signs pointed to one conclusion: William was ready to intervene. What is remarkable about this moment is the interplay between family dynamics and institutional duty. William, trained since childhood for kingship, understands that the monarchy is a delicate institution, one that thrives on tradition, perception, and control of narrative. Harry and Meghan, by contrast, had been navigating a world outside that structure, media-driven, public-facing, and focused on personal branding. The clash was inevitable. But what turned a simmering tension into a breaking point was William's direct intervention, the so-called ultimatum that insiders now describe as firm, unyielding, and emotionally charged. According to multiple sources, the ultimatum revolved around a simple, but explosive, question: could Harry and Meghan return to royal duties on terms that would preserve the hierarchy and public trust? William's position, reportedly, was non-negotiable. He could accept no compromises that might undermine his own future role as king, nor could he allow precedent to be set that blurred the lines between personal ambition and institutional duty. In essence, he was drawing a line in the sand. The monarchy's structure and integrity came first, even before family reconciliation. The language of the ultimatum, while private, is said to have been both direct and emotionally loaded. Some insiders describe it as a stern warning: while others characterize it as a demand with moral weight. William's point was clear. If Harry and Meghan wished to reintegrate, they must adhere to expectations that aligned with the monarchy's long-standing rules. Any deviation could not be tolerated. To an outsider, it might sound like a simple administrative demand, but in the royal context, it carried immense emotional resonance. Titles, duties, appearances, and, ultimately, family approval were all contingent upon compliance. The impact of this ultimatum was immediate. Charles, already navigating his own pressures as sovereign and father, now faced the added complexity of reconciling his son's conflicting positions. On one side was William, asserting authority and prioritizing the future of the crown. On the other side were Harry and Meghan, advocating for autonomy, recognition, and the possibility of returning on their own terms. Charles, long admired for his ability to mediate and weigh competing interests, was suddenly forced into a corner. Every decision he made could be interpreted as favoring one son over the other, a delicate balance that could have profound personal and institutional consequences. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan, aware of the brewing opposition, reportedly began evaluating their next steps with heightened urgency. Friends and advisors cautioned them against hasty decisions, urging strategic patience. Yet the emotional stakes were high. For Harry, the ultimatum from his older brother was not just a challenge. It was a confrontation with legacy, loyalty, and personal identity. For Meghan, it symbolized the entrenched obstacles she faced from the moment she entered the royal family. The couple's internal deliberations were reportedly intense, filled with debates about principle, reputation, and the potential fallout of compliance or defiance. From the outside, this might read like a straightforward negotiation. But the reality, as insiders emphasize, was far more complex. The ultimatum was not just about titles or duties. It was about power, influence, and control of narrative. It was about who defines acceptable behavior within the monarchy, who holds the moral high ground, and who ultimately shapes the story that the public consumes. Every word, every decision, every reaction had ramifications far beyond the immediate family, affecting public perception, media coverage, and even international relations. And yet, despite the tension, there is evidence that William's intervention was motivated not solely by duty, but by genuine concern. Sources suggest that he feared the monarchy's credibility could be damaged by a poorly managed reintegration, and that he wanted to prevent public scandal from undermining the institution his family has devoted itself to for generations. His stance, while firm, was also strategic. It was about preserving both tradition and his own future authority. The ultimatum, then, can be seen as a calculated move, balancing emotion, power, and foresight. What makes this chapter of the story particularly fascinating is the interplay between personal relationships and public responsibility. Family dynamics are rarely simple, and when they intersect with institutional expectations, the complexity multiplies exponentially. William's ultimatum forced Charles to act decisively, prompted Harry and Meghan to consider their options, and introduced a level of urgency that left little room for compromise. The palace, long accustomed to managing appearances, was suddenly navigating raw, unfiltered emotion, and the world was watching every step. As tension escalated, sources claim that private discussions intensified. Advisors, lawyers, and confidants all weighed in, attempting to predict outcomes, advise strategies, and prepare messaging. The palace, known for its meticulous control of information, suddenly faced a scenario where the emotional undercurrents could no longer be contained. Leaks, speculation, and media scrutiny were inevitable, and the potential for missteps loomed large. The ultimatum had not only clarified William's position, it had set the stage for a high-stakes confrontation that could redefine the monarchy. The emotional impact on Charles was profound. For decades, he had navigated the delicate balance between love for his children and the demands of public duty. Now, he faced a scenario where any decision risked personal hurt and public criticism. Reports suggest sleepless nights, private counsel, and careful deliberation as he weighed the consequences of compliance or defiance. Every angle mattered. The line of succession, public perception, family loyalty, and the historical legacy of the crown. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan were reportedly preparing their own response. Strategic meetings, private consultations, and media planning all suggested that they were not passive in this confrontation. They were calculating, considering options, and weighing the personal and public consequences of their next move. Sources indicate that this preparation was tinged with both frustration and resolve, a mixture of anger at perceived injustice and determination to assert autonomy. The ultimatum, then, represents a turning point, not just in the timeline of this specific conflict, but in the broader story of the monarchy's evolution. It demonstrates how personal decisions, family dynamics, and institutional pressures can converge in ways that are both deeply emotional and publicly consequential. The stakes could not be higher, and the consequences would ripple outward, affecting not just those involved, but the public's perception of the monarchy itself. Imagine being a father and a king at the same time, one role bound by duty and tradition, the other bound by love and loyalty. For King Charles III, the decision to strip Harry and Meghan of their royal titles was not a simple administrative action. It was a deeply personal crossroads, where public responsibility collided violently with familial bonds. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, carried implications for the monarchy, the media, and most importantly, his children. The dilemma started long before the ultimatum. Charles has spent decades balancing a delicate equation, upholding centuries of royal tradition while navigating an era of unprecedented public scrutiny. Every misstep could become a global headline. Every act of favoritism or negligence could spark criticism, speculation, and long-lasting consequences. And now, he faced the ultimate test: how to enforce order without causing a permanent rupture within his own family. In private, Charles reportedly wrestled with conflicting priorities. On one side was duty, the expectation that the monarch maintain order, discipline, and hierarchy within the royal household. Royal titles are not just ceremonial. They are symbols of responsibility, authority, and continuity. Stripping Harry and Meghan of their titles would reaffirm the boundaries of the monarchy, sending a message that family ties do not excuse breaches of protocol. On the other side was emotion, the very human desire to protect his children, preserve relationships, and avoid creating lasting pain. The tension between these poles created a crucible of indecision, one that would define the next chapter of royal history. To fully understand Charles's predicament, we must consider the broader context. The monarchy exists not only as a family institution, but as a public one. Every action has consequences for public perception. Every decision is scrutinized by a global audience with varying degrees of loyalty, judgment, and fascination. If Charles appeared too lenient, he risked undermining his authority and emboldening other family members to challenge tradition. If he appeared too harsh, he risked public sympathy for Harry and Meghan, further tarnishing the monarchy's image. The dilemma was not just moral, it was political, emotional, and historical. Reports from palace insiders suggest that the conversations leading to the decision were fraught with tension. Advisors presented conflicting viewpoints. Some urged leniency, citing family loyalty and potential reconciliation. Others emphasized the long-term institutional risks, arguing that failure to act decisively would weaken the crown's authority. Charles was forced to weigh not only the immediate emotional fallout, but also the ripple effects on succession, public trust, and the monarchy's place in modern society. Every perspective carried weight, but none could guarantee a right answer. Meanwhile, the media frenzy added another layer of pressure. Rumors of secret meetings, leaked emails, and private conversations fueled speculation. Social media exploded with debate, offering millions of opinions on what Charles should do. Headlines questioned his judgment, his fairness, and even his capacity to maintain unity. In this environment, the king's every move was amplified, dissected, and interpreted, sometimes accurately, sometimes through the lens of bias or agenda. Public scrutiny magnified the stakes, turning a deeply personal family matter into a global spectacle. At the same time, the emotional weight on Charles cannot be overstated. This was his youngest son, the child he had protected, nurtured, and guided through decades of intense public life. And yet, this son, along with his American-born wife, had challenged the very institution Charles had devoted his life to preserving. Stripping titles was not merely an administrative act. It was a statement, a boundary, and a declaration of what behavior the monarchy would tolerate. In private, it is said Charles struggled with guilt, sadness, and doubt. Was he doing the right thing? Was he protecting the institution or harming his family? And how would history remember him? Sources indicate that the decision was made not in isolation but through extensive deliberation. Charles reportedly consulted with senior advisors, legal counsel, and close confidants. Each angle was considered: the legal framework of titles, public relations strategy, succession implications, and the potential for reconciliation. Yet, despite all these considerations, the decision ultimately rested on one human factor: Charles's judgment as a father and king. The weight of centuries, the eyes of the world, and the bonds of family converged in this singular moment. Even as Charles weighed his options, Harry and Meghan were reportedly strategizing their response. Friends and advisors cautioned against impulsive actions, urging measured, thoughtful communication. But the emotional stakes were high. For Harry, the stripping of titles was a deeply personal affront, intertwined with feelings of betrayal, hurt, and frustration. For Meghan, it represented a continuation of the challenges she had faced since joining the royal family, a reflection of the difficulties of navigating an institution steeped in tradition while asserting independence and identity. Their response, both private and eventual public, would shape the narrative and influence public opinion in ways that Charles could not fully control. The dilemma was compounded by William's position. The future king's ultimatum had clarified boundaries, but also intensified familial tension. Charles was caught between the assertive stance of his eldest son and the desires of his youngest. Each path carried risk. Favoring William might alienate Harry and Meghan irreparably, while favoring Harry and Meghan could be seen as undermining William and destabilizing the monarchy. Charles's decision had to strike a delicate balance, a navigation between family loyalty and institutional responsibility that few outside royal circles could fully comprehend. From the outside, the decision may seem straightforward: enforce rules, maintain order, assert authority. But within the palace walls, it was anything but simple. Emotional history, sibling rivalry, public perception, and personal conviction all converged. Reports suggest sleepless nights, anxious consultations, and intense reflection. Every phrase Charles considered, every action he contemplated, carried potential consequences for his children, his legacy, and the monarchy itself. Ultimately, the dilemma reached a point where inaction was no longer an option. The pressure from William, the whispers of reintegration, and the swirling media speculation forced a choice. Charles, in what some insiders describe as a decisive yet heart-wrenching move, opted to strip Harry and Meghan of all their royal titles. This was not just a procedural act. It was a profound statement, one that would resonate both privately and publicly. The emotional complexity of this decision cannot be overstated. Charles, while performing his duties as king, had simultaneously navigated the uncharted waters of family loyalty, sibling rivalry, and parental love. The act of removing titles was a declaration of boundaries, a reinforcement of institutional authority, and a deeply personal decision that carried consequences for every member of the royal family. The stage was set for confrontation, for emotional reckoning, and for the inevitable fallout that would dominate headlines worldwide. The news hit like a thunderclap. Harry and Meghan had been preparing themselves for countless scenarios, but even the most cautious minds cannot fully anticipate the emotional impact of having one's royal titles stripped away. Not quietly, not discreetly, and certainly not by a father and a brother. For the couple, this was more than a symbolic action. It was an affront that touched on identity, legacy, and personal agency. The immediate question they faced was, how should they respond, and how could they navigate the treacherous waters of both family loyalty and public perception? From the moment the decision was communicated, insiders claimed the couple was thrust into a whirlwind of private meetings. Lawyers, public relations experts, close friends, and confidants were summoned to map out the next steps. Every conversation had a layer of strategy, every word measured for both emotional impact and public optics. For Harry, this was intensely personal. He is not just a prince on paper. He is a son, a brother, and now, a man publicly confronted with perceived betrayal from those he trusts most. For Meghan, the stakes were equally high. She had entered a world of tradition and hierarchy, where every step is scrutinized, every misstep amplified, and every act interpreted as either defiance or incompetence. Together, they faced a unique predicament. Reclaiming dignity without inflaming family tensions, asserting agency without seeming combative, and preparing for public scrutiny that would be both relentless and unforgiving. Emotions ran high behind palace doors. Sources suggest that conversations between Harry and Meghan were raw, candid, and occasionally heated. Feelings of frustration, hurt, and disbelief mingled with strategic planning and forward-looking considerations. They knew they had to be careful, one insider reportedly said. But at the same time, this wasn't something you could just accept silently. The titles were a part of their identity, and losing them wasn't just administrative, it was personal. Publicly, the couple maintained a calm, composed demeanor. Social media accounts remained poised, official statements carefully worded, and interviews meticulously crafted. But beneath the surface, reports indicate a combination of disbelief and resolve. They had faced media scrutiny before, but this was different. It was intimate, emotional, and tied directly to family decisions. The act of stripping titles was, in essence, a public acknowledgement of private conflicts, and the couple was determined to navigate it on their terms. Strategically, Harry and Meghan began weighing their options. They could issue a public statement denouncing the decision, risk inflaming tensions, and potentially alienate allies within the palace. Or they could respond with measured grace, preserving their dignity while signaling disappointment and frustration. Advisors reportedly emphasized the importance of framing the narrative carefully. Any reaction would be dissected by millions, analyzed for tone, intent, and alignment with broader public sentiment. One misstep could redefine the story entirely. Reports also suggest that the couple considered the long-term implications of their response. Harry, as a prince who had stepped back from full-time duties, understood that titles carried symbolic and practical weight. Meghan, as someone acutely aware of media narratives and public perception, recognized that any overreaction could be weaponized against them. Together, they reportedly engaged in intense discussions about timing, messaging, and the balance between emotion and strategy. They were aware that their reaction would not only impact their public image, but also shape their ongoing relationship with the monarchy, the media, and their own supporters. The emotional weight of the decision was compounded by personal history. Harry's relationship with William, already complicated by decades of sibling dynamics, was now further strained. Meghan's integration into the royal family, always challenging due to cultural differences, media scrutiny, and institutional expectations, now faced a significant setback. Both individuals reportedly experienced feelings of isolation, frustration, and betrayal, yet they remained committed to presenting a unified front. Meanwhile, the palace itself reportedly braced for fallout. Advisors were reportedly preparing for potential public statements, media interviews, and social media reactions. The royal communications team, accustomed to controlling narratives, faced a rare scenario in which both parties, inside and outside the family, had strong, divergent positions and the capacity to shape public perception. Every action by Harry and Meghan could ripple across international media outlets, influence public opinion polls, and affect perceptions of the monarchy for years to come. Despite the tension, there were hints of strategic restraint. Friends close to the couple claimed that they were determined to avoid actions that could be interpreted as vindictive or petty. The goal, reportedly, was to assert dignity, convey disappointment, and maintain credibility, all while preparing for potential public engagement that might allow them to explain their perspective directly. The couple understood that public perception is a powerful tool and that any response needed to balance emotion with prudence. In the days following the announcement, leaks and rumors began to surface, further complicating matters. Media outlets reported on alleged private meetings, draft statements, and internal discussions. Social media erupted with speculation, much of it exaggerated, some of it misleading. For Harry and Meghan, the challenge was twofold: managing their own emotional response and navigating the external narrative that threatened to distort it. Sources indicate that they were deliberate in choosing how and when to communicate, fully aware that timing could influence the tone and outcome of public perception. Emotionally, the stripping of titles represented more than public status. It touched on identity, family loyalty, and personal dignity. For Harry, the act was a tangible reminder of long-standing conflicts, misunderstandings, and a perceived lack of support. For Meghan, it symbolized the challenges of navigating an institution steeped in tradition while asserting independence. Together, the couple reportedly felt a combination of resolve, defiance, and cautious optimism that they could navigate the situation without losing control of their narrative. The response, however, was not merely private contemplation. It had practical implications. Every statement, every interview, every public gesture became part of a larger strategy. Advisors emphasized the need for consistency, messaging alignment, and careful timing. The couple reportedly reviewed potential media angles, considered public perception metrics, and evaluated potential consequences of both direct and indirect communication. In short, the act of responding became a complex exercise in communication, strategy, and emotional management. The intensity of the moment cannot be overstated. Harry and Meghan were navigating a situation where family dynamics, institutional authority, and public perception collided. They were not only responding to a personal affront, but also shaping the narrative of a monarchy under pressure. Every action they took had ripple effects across media outlets, social platforms, and public sentiment. The stakes were high, the scrutiny unrelenting, and the emotional pressure immense. As soon as the decision to strip Harry and Meghan of their royal titles was made public, whether through official channels or subtle leaks, the palace entered a storm unlike any it had faced in recent memory. The walls that normally contained gossip, strategy, and negotiation were no longer enough. The story erupted across media outlets worldwide, transforming a private family conflict into an international spectacle, one that tested the monarchy's ability to control narrative in a digital age where every rumor spreads instantly. Leaks began almost immediately. Sources close to the palace, some allegedly frustrated by internal tensions, reportedly provided journalists with fragments of information, snippets of conversations, drafts of letters, and insider commentary on the emotional fallout. Headlines proliferated overnight. Royal rift widens. Harry and Meghan titles stripped. Charles faces family revolt. The combination of fact, rumor, and speculation created a swirling vortex in which it became nearly impossible to separate truth from conjecture. Social media acted as an accelerant. Twitter threads exploded with tens of thousands of reactions. Memes circulated, and hashtags like #HarryandMeghan and #royal titles trended globally. Public sentiment, as captured through polls and social engagement, was sharply divided. Some criticized Charles for being too harsh, accusing the monarchy of cruelty. Others sided with the king, arguing that the couple's prior actions warranted consequences and that the integrity of the institution had to come first. In a matter of hours, the royal family had become the subject of a worldwide debate over fairness, loyalty, and public duty. The leaks themselves were strategic or perhaps opportunistic. Some insiders clearly sought to sway public opinion, framing the story in ways that cast either the king or the couple in a favorable light. Reports suggested that certain details were carefully leaked to test public reaction before any official statements were made. For Harry and Meghan, this was a double-edged sword. Information could generate sympathy and support, but it also risked fueling negative narratives that the palace could use to justify the stripping of titles. Navigating this media minefield required a combination of restraint, timing, and precise communication. The palace communications team, known for their meticulous planning, faced unprecedented challenges. Traditional control over messaging was disrupted by the immediacy of leaks and the virality of social media. Statements had to be crafted not only for accuracy, but also for tone, timing, and potential public reception. Every word mattered. Missteps could exacerbate tensions, alienate supporters, or provide fodder for critics. Internally, advisors reportedly scrambled to coordinate responses, draft talking points, and anticipate media angles, all while managing the emotional fallout within the family. Meanwhile, the emotional resonance of the leaks cannot be ignored. For Charles, seeing private deliberations and family conversations suddenly publicized was reportedly distressing. The king had hoped for discretion and careful management, but the leaks transformed a delicate family decision into a global spectacle. For William, the leaks intensified pressure as public scrutiny amplified the stakes of his prior ultimatum. And for Harry and Meghan, the leaks were a double-edged sword. They revealed vulnerability but also provided an opportunity to garner public support, framing themselves as victims of unfair treatment within the institution. Public backlash came in waves. Commentators, columnists, and social media users alike debated the fairness of the decision. Opinion pieces explored every angle: the emotional toll on Harry and Meghan, the implications for succession, the role of William in enforcing family boundaries, and the historical precedents, or lack thereof, for such a drastic move. The public's fascination with the monarchy, coupled with modern media amplification, turned a private family matter into a global conversation that spanned continents, cultures, and platforms. In addition to the media storm, the leaks also had internal ramifications. Advisors reported a sense of heightened tension within palace corridors as staff, courtiers, and officials navigated the delicate balance between loyalty to the monarchy and concern over public perception. Meetings became more urgent, briefings more frequent, and strategy sessions more intense. Every decision, from minor communications to high-level meetings, carried amplified significance as the family's actions were being scrutinized in real time by millions of viewers around the world. The impact on Harry and Meghan was equally profound. The leaks forced their hand in ways that may not have been anticipated. They were now public actors in a story that had escalated beyond their private control. Reports suggest that the couple began preparing more direct communications, weighing interviews, written statements, and appearances that could allow them to reclaim narrative authority. Emotional stakes were high. The leaks highlighted betrayal, intensified anger, and created urgency in a situation already fraught with tension. The couple reportedly felt the pressure of both defending their dignity and navigating public perception with precision. Interestingly, the palace's handling of the leaks revealed much about the evolution of monarchy in the digital era. In previous generations, information could be contained and controlled. Today, instant communication, social media virality, and relentless journalism make secrecy nearly impossible. The institution must now contend not only with family dynamics and protocol, but also with a 24/7 media environment that amplifies emotion, rumor, and speculation. Every misstep is magnified. Every private detail risks becoming a public headline. As the public debate raged, contrasting narratives began to emerge. Supporters of Harry and Meghan emphasized the personal betrayal, highlighting the emotional toll of losing royal titles and the continued scrutiny they face as outsiders attempting to navigate a rigid institution. Supporters of Charles and William emphasized duty, tradition, and the necessity of maintaining order within the monarchy, arguing that the stripping of titles was a measured response to protect the institution's integrity. The tension between these narratives created an ongoing cultural conversation, one that merged celebrity fascination with institutional critique, personal grievance with historical precedent. And yet, despite the media frenzy and public opinion battles, the story was far from over. Behind palace doors, internal strategy sessions continued, preparing for the next wave of public and private developments. Legal teams, communications advisors, and family confidants worked tirelessly to anticipate outcomes, manage messaging, and mitigate potential fallout. Every interaction, every statement, every appearance became a tactical move in a high-stakes game where family loyalty, institutional authority, and public opinion intersected in ways that were both unpredictable and consequential. The palace had weathered crises before, but the combination of leaks, media scrutiny, and social media amplification created a unique environment. The institution, with its centuries of tradition, was being tested by modern dynamics of transparency, immediacy, and emotional storytelling. The decision to strip titles, once a private family matter, had become a public drama, and the consequences would continue to unfold in unpredictable ways. To understand the gravity of King Charles's decision, it helps to look back at the annals of royal history. Monarchies are institutions steeped in tradition, hierarchy, and symbolism, Yet even centuries of precedent offer few examples as personal and public as the stripping of royal titles. When a sovereign makes such a move, it is not merely an administrative choice. It is a statement that reverberates through generations, echoing both familial and institutional consequences. Royal titles, at their core, are far more than honorifics. They represent duty, privilege, lineage, and public trust. They signify a role within an institution larger than any individual, linking personal identity to a centuries-old framework. Losing a title is therefore symbolic of exclusion, not just from official functions, but from the implicit recognition of belonging within the monarchy itself. Historically, there have been instances of exile, demotion, and censure, but rarely with the complexity and public scrutiny that modern media imposes. Consider Edward VIII, whose abdication in 1936 rocked the British monarchy. Edward chose love over duty, relinquishing the throne for Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. His decision created a constitutional crisis and altered the line of succession. Though Edward was stripped of the practical authority he would have held as king, he retained his title of Duke of Windsor. The circumstances were unprecedented, but the key difference lies in choice. Edward voluntarily stepped away. In contrast, Harry and Meghan did not voluntarily renounce all titles. Their removal was imposed, marking a historically rare intersection of family dynamics, institutional authority, and public consequence. Other historical examples highlight the stakes of royal censure. Queen Victoria faced scandals involving her extended family, particularly her children, where public perception and propriety demanded intervention. Titles were withheld, privileges curtailed, and responsibilities reassigned to maintain the monarchy's credibility. Yet, even in these cases, public scrutiny was far more limited than in today's digital landscape. The modern amplification of information means that every decision, every leak, and every emotional ripple is magnified exponentially. What may once have been a private, controlled censure now becomes a global spectacle overnight. The precedent of George IV's family conflicts also illustrates the tension between personal desire and royal duty. When family members engaged in behavior deemed inappropriate or damaging to the crown, titles and responsibilities were sometimes reassigned, marriages scrutinized, and public messaging carefully curated. The goal was always twofold: preserve the monarchy's integrity and protect the institution from scandal. Yet in every historical case, the personal and public consequences were significant, illustrating that royal discipline is never purely procedural. It is always intertwined with human relationships, emotion, and legacy. Modern history provides additional context. In the late 20th century, Princess Margaret faced constraints due to her personal choices, marriage decisions, and public behavior. While her titles were largely intact, she encountered restrictions and scrutiny that limited her official participation and shaped her public narrative. Similarly, Prince Andrew's recent controversies illustrate the evolving interplay between personal actions, public perception, and the consequences imposed by the royal institution. Though Andrew retained his titles until voluntary or forced changes, the public and institutional response demonstrates how the monarchy manages crises involving family members while balancing public trust and media scrutiny. What makes the case of Harry and Meghan unique is the convergence of multiple factors. First, their removal from working royal status had already complicated their relationship with the monarchy. Second, the potential for reintegration, combined with William's ultimatum, created an unprecedented familial and institutional standoff. Third, the global media landscape amplifies every detail, every leak, and every emotional reaction. Finally, the personal dimensions: Charles's parental responsibility, William's position as future king, Harry and Meghan's desire for autonomy, combine to create a historically rare scenario where precedent offers guidance, but no clear roadmap. The symbolic weight of stripping titles cannot be overstated. Historically, removing a royal title sends a clear signal. The individual is no longer fully recognized as part of the institution in an official capacity. It redefines relationships, alters public perception, and reshapes the roles and responsibilities of the parties involved. For Harry and Meghan, the loss of titles is not just administrative. It is deeply personal, signaling exclusion and creating an emotional chasm that is difficult to bridge. At the same time, historical precedent shows that these actions often have long-term consequences beyond the immediate family. Public opinion, political influence, and institutional reputation are all affected. Missteps can erode trust in the monarchy, create enduring public sympathy for those removed, and alter the narrative for generations. In the modern era, where every royal action is scrutinized globally, these consequences are amplified. The decision by Charles, therefore, is not just a family matter. It is a historical event with enduring implications. Interestingly, even within historical contexts, such actions often provoke unexpected responses. The abdication of Edward VIII, Margaret's limitations, and other instances of royal censure reveal a common pattern. The more personal the intervention, the greater the emotional fallout. Family members often respond with public statements, media engagement, or personal action, which then reshapes the institution's narrative and forces further strategic responses. Harry and Meghan's situation aligns with this pattern, but with the added dimension of social media virality, public campaigns, and real-time global commentary. As history shows, royal authority is never absolute in the emotional sphere. Decisions may be legally binding, procedurally correct, and institutionally justified, but human response is unpredictable. Emotions, loyalty, resentment, and love all intersect in ways that can undermine or reinforce authority. Charles's decision, grounded in precedent and institutional necessity, nevertheless opens the door to a cascade of emotional, strategic, and public challenges that will unfold over years. Yet historical precedent also offers insight into potential strategies. Monarchs have navigated family disputes by controlling narrative, carefully timing statements, and leveraging tradition to reinforce authority. These strategies can mitigate backlash, preserve institutional integrity, and maintain public trust. The question is whether the modern monarchy, under the scrutiny of digital media and global audiences, can employ these strategies effectively. Early indications suggest a delicate balancing act. Charles must assert authority while managing emotion, maintain tradition while addressing public perception, and navigate family loyalty while enforcing institutional boundaries. But what history cannot predict, and what makes this moment extraordinary, is the human element. Harry and Meghan, armed with media influence, public support, and personal determination, are not passive actors. William, driven by responsibility and vision, is assertive in shaping outcomes. Charles, caught between duty and love, must make decisions with incomplete information and unpredictable reactions. The intersection of historical precedent, personal emotion, and modern media creates a dynamic scenario that may redefine what is possible within a modern monarchy. The moment Harry and Meghan's titles were stripped became a catalyst for a media frenzy of unprecedented scale. For centuries, the British monarchy has managed its image with careful, calculated messaging. Courtiers, advisors, and communications teams have meticulously curated every public appearance, every statement, and every ceremonial gesture. But in the age of instant news, social media virality, and global 24-hour coverage, controlling narrative is no longer possible. The stripping of Harry and Meghan's titles threw the palace into uncharted territory, where leaks, speculation, and emotional storytelling drove the story faster than any official messaging could contain. Within hours, news outlets around the world were running headlines that combined fact, rumor, and sensationalism. Royal rift erupts, Harry and Meghan stripped of titles, and monarchy in crisis dominated both print and digital spaces. Each report emphasized drama over nuance, framing the situation as a family feud with historical and global consequences. Television anchors debated the implications endlessly, dissecting body language, analyzing tone, and speculating about motives. Every word, every glance, every reported private conversation became ammunition for public debate. Social media acted as both accelerant and amplifier. Platforms such as Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok erupted with commentary from fans, critics, journalists, and influencers. Hashtags like #RoyalScandal, #Harry and Meghan, and #Charles versus William trended globally. Memes spread at lightning speed, offering humorous, biting, or sympathetic interpretations of the family conflict. Online forums became echo chambers for outrage, support, and speculation. Every leak, whether intentional or accidental, was dissected and amplified, creating an environment in which the palace had little control. The intensity of the media storm also reflected deep-seated public fascination with the monarchy as both institution and family. Harry and Meghan are unique in that their story bridges traditional royalty with modern celebrity. Their marriage, media presence, and previous controversies had already captured global attention. When their titles were stripped, it was not merely a procedural event. It was a story loaded with emotion, history, and human drama. The public's emotional investment ensured that coverage would be relentless, polarized, and deeply personal. Sources within the palace reportedly described the atmosphere as chaotic. Communications teams scrambled to draft statements, anticipate interview questions, and monitor social media sentiment in real time. Advisors debated whether to issue immediate clarifications or to wait and assess public reaction. Every choice carried risk. A hasty statement could escalate criticism, while silence might be interpreted as weakness or guilt. Internal memos reportedly circulated to manage messaging, but in the age of leaks and virality, even carefully curated content could be distorted or misunderstood. The media storm intensified further due to speculation about the internal dynamics of the royal family. Journalists reported on alleged tensions between William and Harry, Charles's struggle to balance fatherhood with kingship, and Meghan's ongoing challenges navigating royal life. These narratives, whether fully accurate or partially fabricated, captured the imagination of the public. They painted a picture of a family under siege, torn between duty, loyalty, and personal grievances. Emotional storytelling, highlighting betrayal, rivalry, and heartbreak, drove engagement and reinforced the drama. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's media strategy added fuel to the fire. Insiders suggest the couple was deliberate in their engagement with press outlets, carefully selecting interviews and statements to convey dignity, disappointment, and emotional resonance. Their narrative emphasized themes of personal autonomy, institutional challenges, and perceived injustices, framing their story in ways that resonated globally. The result was a media cycle dominated not only by palace communications, but also by the voices of those directly affected, blurring the line between subject and storyteller. The global nature of coverage also complicated matters. News from the UK reverberated across Europe, North America, Asia, and beyond. Analysts, cultural commentators, and political observers weighed in, offering interpretations influenced by local cultural perspectives and biases. Social media allowed instantaneous discussion across borders, creating an interconnected web of analysis, debate, and emotional response. The monarchy, traditionally insulated from some international commentary, now faced scrutiny on a worldwide stage, magnifying every decision and every misstep. Public reaction reflected deep divisions. Polls suggested a split in opinion. Some expressed outrage at Harry and Meghan, questioning loyalty and adherence to duty. Others sympathized, citing perceived unfair treatment, institutional rigidity, or the emotional toll of the royal system. Commentators debated morality, tradition, and personal responsibility. The polarization fueled further media coverage, creating a feedback loop in which reporting influenced opinion and opinion influenced reporting. The palace, accustomed to measured public sentiment, now faced a maelstrom of unpredictable responses. Leaked details also intensified scrutiny. Journalists reported on internal discussions, strategic meetings, and rumored disagreements, often without confirmation. Whether intentional or accidental, these leaks magnified the drama, allowing the public to witness what had previously been private deliberations. Every leak, analyzed and amplified, added layers of complexity to the narrative and increased pressure on the family to act decisively. Emotionally, the media storm was exhausting for Harry and Meghan. Reports suggest they experienced frustration, anger, and exhaustion as every move was dissected publicly. Yet the couple remained deliberate, recognizing that missteps could be costly. Their strategic response was calculated, balancing transparency, emotional impact, and media control, a delicate dance in which every statement could shift public perception. For the palace, The storm highlighted vulnerabilities in traditional control of narrative. Modern media dynamics, coupled with personal storytelling and social media virality, created an environment in which institutional authority was challenged not by policy, but by perception. Advisors emphasized monitoring sentiment, anticipating leaks, and crafting narratives that balanced tradition with empathy, but the unpredictability of public reaction made the task immensely challenging. As the storm intensified, underlying questions emerged. How much control does the monarchy truly have in the modern media era? Can historical traditions withstand the scrutiny of instantaneous global communication? How do personal grievances intersect with institutional authority in a world where emotional storytelling drives engagement? These questions underscored the high stakes of the current crisis and highlighted the unprecedented nature of this particular chapter in royal history. Behind the ornate walls of Buckingham Palace, power is rarely straightforward. Every decision is scrutinized, every alliance carefully calculated, and every word carries weight not just for the individual, but for the monarchy itself. The stripping of Harry and Meghan's titles created a seismic shift in the palace's internal dynamics. Courtiers, advisors, and senior staff suddenly found themselves navigating a minefield of loyalty, strategy, and emotional tension. In this chapter, we explore the unseen currents, who aligned with the king, who supported the heirs, and who found themselves caught between institutional duty and personal sentiment. Alliances within the palace are often subtle, forged through decades of service, trust, and shared understanding of royal protocol. Advisors who had worked closely with Charles for years reportedly felt the weight of their responsibility multiply. On one side, there were those who supported Charles's decision unequivocally, emphasizing the importance of preserving the monarchy's integrity. These individuals argued that any compromise could erode public trust, weaken succession protocols, and create long-term instability. Their position was clear. The rules of the institution must be enforced, regardless of familial pain. Others, however, leaned toward empathy for Harry and Meghan. These courtiers, having observed the couple's struggles with media scrutiny, cultural adaptation, and institutional constraints, reportedly advocated for measured leniency. Their argument centered on human considerations: the emotional well-being of the family, public perception of fairness, and the potential for reconciliation. They cautioned that a harsh response could be perceived as outdated, punitive, or lacking compassion, fueling further media criticism and public skepticism. The tension between these factions created an atmosphere of cautious maneuvering. Meetings were tense, advice was often filtered through layers of consideration, and leaks, intentional or not, became a tool in internal influence. Sources suggest that some palace staff used media channels subtly to advance their position, providing selective details to journalists in ways that would generate public sympathy for one side or the other. The line between loyalty to the institution and personal allegiance was increasingly blurred, leaving advisors walking a delicate tightrope. Prince William's position further complicated the internal dynamics. As heir apparent, he wielded significant influence. His ultimatum regarding Harry and Meghan's potential return as working royals had already established him as a decisive force within family decision-making. Courtiers aligned with William reportedly emphasized order, hierarchy, and precedent, arguing that any reintegration of Harry and Meghan on ambiguous terms could destabilize the monarchy. Meanwhile, those sympathetic to Charles's paternal dilemma were cautious, recognizing that William's assertiveness could inflame family tensions and draw public scrutiny. Harry and Meghan, while outside the palace in terms of day-to-day operations, reportedly maintained indirect influence through loyal allies, legal advisors, and public-facing communications teams. These individuals acted as intermediaries, conveying information, gauging public reaction, and occasionally leaking carefully chosen details to shape narratives. The palace, aware of this external influence, treated every interaction as strategic, balancing diplomacy with firmness. The presence of adversaries, those actively opposed to Harry and Meghan within the palace, cannot be understated. Some staff reportedly viewed the couple's previous departures, media engagements, and advocacy work as breaches of protocol, demonstrating a lack of commitment to traditional royal responsibilities. For these individuals, The removal of titles was not only justified but necessary to assert institutional authority. Leaks to sympathetic journalists, critical commentary, and strategic framing of internal communications were reportedly employed to ensure that the monarchy's perspective remained dominant in public discourse. At the same time, allies of Harry and Meghan within the institution sought to mitigate damage. Senior aides, trusted courtiers, and even distant family members reportedly offered counsel, strategizing ways to preserve dignity, manage public perception, and prepare for potential reintegration scenarios. These efforts were delicate, too overt, and they risked backlash. Too passive, and they risked marginalization. The balance of influence within the palace became a high-stakes game, with each action potentially reshaping the trajectory of family and institutional relationships. Tensions also extended to the staff who managed day-to-day operations: private secretaries, communications officers, and household managers. These individuals are often the invisible engines that keep royal life functional, yet they were thrust into a situation where loyalty, discretion, and judgment were constantly tested. Sources describe an environment where small decisions, inadvertent comments, or even minor leaks could spark cascading consequences, amplifying the emotional and strategic stakes of the unfolding drama. The interplay between formal authority and personal influence created a dynamic environment. Charles, as king, held ultimate decision-making power, but his choices were informed by advisors whose perspectives were often divided along lines of principle, loyalty, and emotional resonance. William, as heir apparent, exerted pressure that shaped both perception and policy. Harry and Meghan, though physically removed from the palace, influenced outcomes through allies, media engagement, and strategic communications. The result was a multi-layered chess game, where every move was anticipated, countered, and analyzed. The emotional currents running through the palace were equally powerful. Staff and advisors, many of whom have served the family for decades, reportedly felt torn between personal sympathy for Harry and Meghan and their loyalty to the king. Some admitted private frustration at the challenges of navigating conflicting interests. Others felt compelled to advocate quietly, hoping to shape outcomes without provoking overt conflict. In such an environment, trust became both a currency and a vulnerability. Alliances shifted subtly, with each decision potentially altering loyalties and influence. What makes this situation extraordinary is the combination of emotion, strategy, and visibility. In previous eras, internal palace conflicts could remain largely hidden from public view, managed through discreet counsel and private negotiation. Today, however, leaks, social media amplification, and relentless global coverage ensure that